I'm Beverly Lewis with the Florida Bar Center for Professionalism. Welcome to another in the historical video series. We're in Tallahassee, Florida today, across the street from the Supreme Court building. The date is February 1st, 2001. And today it's my pleasure to introduce you to Supreme Court Justice Barbara Pariente. Justice Pariente, thank you so much for agreeing to come and talk with us today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
This is an honor, and we start off kind of in a chronological mode. Please tell us a little bit about your background, your career, starting with law school, or earlier if you'd like. What kind of encouraged you to go into the field of law?
That's a very broad question, and one that's difficult to answer as the years pass to try to remember back. But I grew up in the 50s and 60s. Well, actually, I was born in 1948. And during that period of time, women were really not encouraged to go into professions such as law or many of the other professions that women are now accepted in fairly large numbers. So I went to college and actually majored in communications and was interested in going into educational broadcasting. And somewhere around my junior year, I had become involved with a documentary on legal services for the poor, which had just then, this was the late 60s, had just then started as a national movement, being able to provide legal services for those that couldn't afford legal services. And that appealed to me a great deal. And I had never really thought of law in that way. My exposure to law was probably something like watching Perry Mason on TV. I didn't know lawyers. Certainly I didn't know any women lawyers. But that idea of doing something that could help other people and empower people to assert their rights really had a great deal of appeal to me. So that's really what led me to go to law school. Plus the fact, and I think this is sort of ironic in thinking back on it, I was concerned that the field of broadcasting back then would be too competitive a field and too difficult for a woman to break into. I guess I knew so little about the legal field at that time that I didn't have that same concern with going to law school. But that basically is what led me to go to law school, was this idea that I could work in an area that might make a difference in people's lives. So that's what led me to law school. In 1970, I entered George Washington University Law School in Washington, D.C.
Was there anyone you encountered along the way in school or just shortly out of it who influenced you greatly?
In law school, I don't know that there was any one person in law school. I think that I was really taken with both being in Washington at that period of time. That was a very exciting thing to do. I was involved in several internships where I both worked at the public defender's office and also in legal services. And the people that I encountered both within the law school but also in those outside internships, I think were the beginning of seeing individuals that really took what they did as a living in a very serious, all-encompassing way, that it was that they were doing what I consider to be very important things, not on the big scale, but on the small scale of, again, making a difference in people's lives. So basically, that's what, there wasn't a person in law school, but I think those experiences, which I still think are very important for law students to engage in, were something that for me was very, very important. Right out of law school, I came to Florida in 1973, and I was a federal law clerk for a judge in the Southern District of Florida, Judge Norman Rutger. He was just then a newly appointed federal court judge. And during that time, I had the privilege, the 2 years that I was clerking for him in South Florida, of encountering some marvelous, marvelous lawyers, people such as Aaron Podhurst, Bob Josephsberg, some of the real stellar lawyers in our profession. I also just encountered a great deal of excellent lawyers that performed really well in the courtroom. And since I know we're going to be talking about professionalism, to me embodied the idea of what a lawyer should be like. And I think that those 2 years of a federal clerkship really have a great deal to do with how grounded I was as I came out into the profession, that it was like a real mentorship during that period of time, not only with the federal judge that I worked for, but also having the opportunity to observe the lawyers that I observed over that 2-year period of time.
So it was more than merely seeing them at work. It was an opportunity to interact with them.
It was, of course, during that time, as a law clerk, you really didn't have a whole lot of interaction, but certainly observing them and also speaking with them, because really it was Aaron Pothurst, who is one of, again, the stalwarts of our profession, that led me to think about practicing at the firm that I eventually went with in West Palm Beach, and that was the Cohn-Wagner firm, where I started in 1975.
Tell me a little bit more about the Chronology, because it's been an interesting road for you.
It's been a long road, as I think back to where I started, and when I talk to people about, when they ask me, did I always want to be a judge? I said, really, it was not anything that even remotely occurred to me as I began my profession. I was always interested in doing my best at whatever task I had at hand, but I don't know that I had any long-term overview of, well, if I do this, I will end up here where I am now. Certainly not that. And not really even on the bench. So I think that in the beginning stages of the litigation, and I had mentioned earlier that I went to law school to work in legal services, and that's not where I ended up, although I have always had a connection with legal services. I served on the board of our local legal aid society during much of the time that I was in West Palm Beach. And I guess you're asking me about how my career went in West Palm Beach. Basically, I started out with what was considered a very, very prominent law firm in West Palm Beach that did civil trial litigation. That was the Cohn-Wagner firm. And I stayed there for approximately 8 years. And then in 1993, I would say, oh my goodness, I just left out 10 years. I went with them in 1975, and then in 1983, I went on my own with Lou Silber, who was one of the partners in the Cohn-Wagner firm, and we started our own small firm in West Palm Beach, where I remained for 10 years. And it was in 1993 that I went on the appellate court bench. You see what happens as the years go on. So I was in private practice for 18 years. And I stressed that because, and then I was also did the clerkship for 2 years, so that was 20 years before I went on the bench, because I think that experience in private practice was a very, very valuable and invaluable experience, so that when I talk to young lawyers, that they understand, again, that it wasn't something that somehow I started out as a judge, that this practice was a very long road and not always easy, very stressful. And during that time, I also had to balance the demands of having a family and raising a young son, and so that I know or hope I understand what younger professionals are going through during this day and age when, again, the time pressures do not seem to be any less, but the demands perhaps greater, and that's something that we have to constantly strive to, strike that proper balance between the needs of your professional life and the needs of your personal life.
You have seen changes in the legal profession over the time that you mentioned. What strikes you as being some of the most significant and good or bad changes? It's interesting when you say that, whether they're good or bad and what changes. Obviously, the size of the profession, we have gone from a relatively small number of lawyers to an increasing number of lawyers. And what that change has to do with is just, who do you know in the profession? I mean, when I started, again, it's like the good old days, but when I started out in Palm Beach County in 1975, you knew all the lawyers. You knew them by their names, and I think that change of going from something where it was much more in the way of personal relationships to a sort of more anonymity is a change. I think that another change is in advertising. When I first started out in 1973, if we could take a Yellow Pages from 1973 and take one now, almost 30 years later, I think we'd be shocked. Because, of course, there wasn't any Yellow Page advertising back then, and certainly not the kind of ads that you see today. I understand that lawyer advertising is required or demanded by the United States Supreme Court precedents, but I think that the advent of advertising and the proliferation of advertising has been a change in our profession, and I'm not sure one that is necessarily for the good. And I know that the bar tries mightily to come up with regulations on advertising, and we struggle with balancing, the need for the First Amendment expression versus the need for regulation so that there is not harm to the image of the lawyer. And I think that's really, unfortunately, what has been a byproduct of that, of advertising. I think that another change, and probably one that is a good change, is an increasing use of mediation in the legal profession and other forms of alternative dispute resolution. I think that that is especially important as we look at an area of the law that I was not involved in as a lawyer, but I'm very interested in in my current position, which is in family law, that we've got to keep on looking at ways to promote the resolution of controversies involving families and minimizing harm to children. So I think that the increasing use and recognition of alternative ways of resolving those disputes is something that is a change, and hopefully a change for the better. I'm trying to asking about other changes. I think that a change that's a good change is the use of the CLE, the mandatory education. That was something that did not exist when I started, and I think that's a positive change. I think that this professionalism movement and the focus on it is very, very important. That is something that, again, when I started as a lawyer in 1975, I can't say that people were litigating in a way that we wouldn't have needed professionalism. I found that, in fact, somewhat of a shock going from the federal system to the state court system, that the discovery game that existed and still exists in the state court system was, to me, something that I just didn't understand. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand actually coming from the federal court system into the state court system. I thought this was supposed to be a search for the truth. What are we doing
trying to obfuscate in discovery? Why are we trying to hold these documents back when we should be looking at exchanging documents? And so that's something that I think that focus, when the professionalism initiative got started with John Frost and Justice Anstead, I said, hallelujah, here we have a situation where, for me, it was something very upsetting that this was going on, and now we finally have a public recognition of it. So I think that it was very important that the bar take that and recognize it.
Well, you represent a very significant change, it seems to me. I've spoken with 3 ladies in jurisprudence, and you were the second woman on the Supreme Court. It was wonderful to look at your investiture tape and see you sworn in by the first woman on the Supreme Court, Justice Pariente. Is that a change that has struck you as continuing to be significant over the years?
Yes, you mentioned Rosemary Barquette, and you asked me earlier, were there people along the way that influenced me? And Rosemary Barquette is somebody that I can say has been a positive influence in my life. First of all, just again reminiscing quickly back, that when I came to West Palm Beach in 1975, I interviewed at several law firms, and one of the law firms that I interviewed with was the Cohn-Wagner law firm. And at that time, that firm, as most firms, had no women associates or certainly no women partners. And I was interested in doing litigation, having seen the type of litigation that had gone on in the federal courts, and that struck me as something that would be a very good thing to hone my litigation skills. So I went to that firm, and their response was, well, you know, we've never hired a woman before, and there's this woman litigator across town. Her name's Rosemary Barquette, and she's doing a pretty good job. So maybe it is about time to hire a woman. And so I guess a change would be that certainly back then, the forthrightness with which the firms admitted their reluctance to hire a woman, sort of seeing it as a very significant change for them to hire a woman into what really was an all-male, and I might say an all-white male club. When I graduated law school, there was 6% of our class were women. Now, routinely, we are graduating over 50% of the classes are women, or somewhere around there. So there are changes in the number of women coming into the profession. Certainly there are changes in the number of minorities coming in, but I think in a lesser numbers. But the concern that I have is whether the profession has truly integrated women, minorities, diverse views into the profession. You hate to use statistics, but if you look at, are women in positions of power within firms? Are they partners? If they're not, why aren't they becoming partners? Are they becoming partners in equal numbers? If they're not, why not? Are women being treated differently by judges, by their adversary? It may be nothing more than good old Southern charm. You know, when I first started out, people were calling me honey. And I, as you can probably tell from maybe the residual accent here, I grew up in the Northeast. People didn't call you honey. And I was told that was really just a Southern gentleman term. But that is offensive to women. So sometimes it's a question of just what you say or how you say it. Are you respecting the other individual? And respect for a woman may not just be the sort of the Southern way of opening the door for the woman or asking, well, let me carry your briefcase, but it's truly a question of respecting that person as an individual. And so so I see the change as being, yes, women are in the profession in greater numbers, but are they litigating? Are they in the courtroom more? Or are they self-selecting out of those kinds of more traditionally male bastions of, being in the courtroom, doing battle. And it's funny that the people that you have interviewed, or some of the women, like Judge Griffin, she was a litigator. Judge Barquette was a litigator. I know Justice Quince likes to say, no, she always did the appellate practice, but she was not a litigator. But women really shy away from that. And I don't know if it's a chicken and the egg argument, reason that still doesn't feel like a welcome place to be. And so we still have a long way to go as far as changing perceptions and sensitizing lawyers to women in the profession, and also women being willing to take that extra step and make sure that they go the extra mile to be a part of the traditional establishment bar. I know that, like for example, the Florida Association for Women Lawyers opposed the merit selection for trial judges, as did many other of the African American Bar Association, Hispanic Bar Association, and they did it because they felt that the judicial nominating process was unfriendly to women and to minorities. I think this is something that we've really got to explore and have a conversation about to understand what's the perception of fairness that has gone on, and why are groups like women and minorities feeling still that they're not part of this process. So the communication is critical. And so I think we've come a long way, but we haven't come as long a way as we think we have. Now, this court certainly, not only was it a great privilege to become a member of this court, but it's the second woman on the Supreme Court. But it was even better when Justice Quince came on as the third woman and the second woman on the court. And the traditional thing that we say, listen, when we finally can stop counting firsts and seconds, that's when we know we'll have arrived.
We're talking kind of about aspirational things in looking ahead to the days when we don't have to count numbers 1, 2, and 3. I wonder, we probably should establish what you feel the difference is between ethics and professionalism. People have sometimes used the words almost interchangeably.
And I have heard various descriptions about the difference. Of course, ethics, the ethics of this profession are written down and passed by the Florida Bar and approved by the Florida Supreme Court. So those are the rules. Those are the minimums of what is expected, so that if you violate one of the ethical rules, you are subject to discipline by the Florida Bar. And yet professionalism is really a broader concept. Professionalism is the idea of how do you, from my point of view, how do you act as a person vis-a-vis your clients, your adversary, your judges. How, as a judge, do you act? It's about civility. It is about respect for one another. It is about taking what you do as a lawyer, it's not a business. It is not a way to make a living. It is a privilege that is bestowed by the state. We are provided a monopoly to serve the public. And therefore, it is, when you talk about aspirational, it is the way you view what you do, and that your view of it, hopefully, is that you are not going to just do what is necessary to get by, but you are going to do what is necessary for your own sense of self-worth and respect, and also for respecting the other person. So it's so much more. It is, we are a profession, and yet we are a profession that is looked at as a profession where half the public thinks that we don't have ethics. They don't even think we have rules. So I think the difference is, one, really, ethics to me has to do with the basic rules, and professionalism is how you choose to function as a lawyer or a judge. It's not just what can you get by with, and it is not about whether you're winning or losing. It is about achieving a just result in what you do on a day-to-day basis. And I don't know, I could probably go on and on about it, but it's something that is very hard to regulate. And I think that is, at the break, we were talking a little bit about how you do it, and that's the problem. We can, to some extent, we have written in professionalism for certification requirements, and so therefore if someone doesn't conduct themselves in a professional manner, that is a ground for not granting them certification as a specialist in a particular area of the law. But we can't necessarily, through the normal channels of the disciplinary process, if somebody is just not a nice person, we can't get, what are we going to do about them? So I'm probably transitioning into what can we do then to enforce or to help the younger lawyers around and the older lawyers and the judges to see that being professional is really what being a lawyer and a judge is about. Being ethical is simply doing the minimum. And I had come across something a short time ago, and it might have been from the American Bar Association, but their take was that, we have ethical rules, we have discovery rules. And then there is a philosophy that as long as you play by those rules, anything else that you do is acceptable to win for your client. And I think that if that is the philosophy, then that person is missing the bigger picture, or that is just getting by is not going to be enough if you are going to do a service for your client and for the legal system and for the judicial system. And so to encourage people to do it, you have to say, look, in the long run, it's going to put you in better stead for you, so you will gain something for yourself. No judge, at least no judge through the Judicial Nominating Commission process, really, if they haven't acted professionally in their career, is going to ascend to the bench. They may be able to do it through the election process, but you can't do it through the merit selection process, because if you have, say, if you're a litigator and you litigated in a scorched earth type of way, your adversaries will be there to be opposing your nomination. So it's something that there is a self-interest part of it also. For judges, judges when they see that type of person coming before them, the person that may be playing just by what's the minimum to get by, but not truly being professional, that lawyer is going to be handicapped, because judges really will listen better and accept more from those lawyers that they know will be honest and straightforward and will do more than is required to represent their client. And so that's, I guess, the secondary gain. The incentive should be, it's really just going to be better for the client. It's going to be better in terms of your credibility in front of a judge if you look at what you're doing and say, I am not just going to do what is necessary to get by. I am not going to win at all costs as long as I can, I don't violate any rule.
You really are helping us take the long view with that answer, so I'll go on with that. If you had a recommendation to share with law schools as to what you'd like to see maybe different or something new in law school training, you've just given them some information that they might not have right out of law school. It's in your interest to be an exemplary attorney. Is there any systemic thing you might want to implement?
Yes, and I say this, and if I say things that law schools are already doing, then I apologize, because I thought about it. Again, I'm here on the court. I do have contact and interaction with the deans at the various law schools, but I cannot say that I'm intimately familiar with how they're approaching the law school curriculum. But one of the things that I would say is, don't be so afraid of asking judges and lawyers to be part of law school programs. Try to integrate that. We talk a lot about mentorship, and maybe that being one of the things that is lacking now as lawyers get out into the profession. That is, who do they have to turn to? Why not think about establishing those relationships early on? I think there are plenty of lawyers and judges that would be happy to do that. I don't know what their selection process is like in law schools. I don't know if they simply look at, grades and their law school entrance tests, but let's examine, why are young people going to law school today? I think that if you ask someone of my age, and maybe because, again, I was a woman and it wasn't just something that I took for granted, why did I go to law school? You'll hear much more in the way of passionate answers about, we really like this profession. We really want to go in. We really want to be a lawyer. Do we now have young people that just really aren't sure what else they're going to do, that are going to law school because it's sort of the easy way out? I have a 23-year-old son who is not in law school, and I'm not sure he will ever go to law school. What he said to me the other day was, Mom, it would be so easy for me to just say, no, well, I think I'll apply to law school now, and it'll give me 3 years to not have to worry about what else I was going to do in my life. And I thought, well, that's a pretty mature response, because I probably would feel better that he was choosing something that was familiar to me, but in the long run, that wouldn't be a very good thing for him, and it might not be good for the profession. So I think that I would really ask students to examine much more why they are entering this field. I also would like to see law schools integrate into all of their courses the aspirational ideals of professionalism. Again, I don't think that you can say, well, we're going to have a 2-hour course on ethics and that's going to be enough. Especially there are opportunities in teaching courses like civil procedure to talk about discovery abuses, to really talk about a philosophy of the rules of civil procedure that encompass professionalism ideals. I also think that because, again, we may have lost not only the respect of the public as a profession, but I don't think, these are from surveys, that lawyers really like other lawyers. So we have to look and say, in the law school setting, let's take a step back. Why not have some more legal history courses or comparative law so we can start to feel good again about what a great legal system that we have? And let's look at what have lawyers done in society. Let's look at the legal heroes of, who signed the Declaration of Independence. How many presidents have been lawyers, and is that a good thing or not a good thing? And that may be debatable with the events of the recent administration. But it is something that I think that we should be able to start to reinstill pride in this profession, that just not, that we're not entering law school we're not going along just to get along. We are entering it for a sort of a higher purpose. I also, one of the things that I would love to be able to really see law schools do in the I mentioned family law area earlier, is that especially in this area, we need to re-examine ways of resolving disputes. I think that lawyers really need to be better trained in the social sciences, not for lawyers to be social workers, but for lawyers to understand that so many of the disputes in the family law area are emotion-based. And so that if we can help them, link them with the proper services to get that resolved, the emotional side of what's going on, that we will be able to have a better level of long-term relationships, family relationships that, again, especially when it comes to children, are critical. We've got to examine that. And I think in law schools, and so I would encourage much more of looking at the areas that are not considered the traditional legal areas. Again, the traditional legal areas being, well, you're either going to be a civil lawyer, and you're going to do litigation, or you'll be a criminal defense lawyer. Those were the choices. And family law was something that I avoided that because I thought, well, that was going to be what they'd have women doing because it was family, and that was the only professor at law school that was a woman was taught family law. So I didn't want anything to do with that. And I think that it is important to stress that of all the family areas, juvenile, that this is encompassing the greater and greater numbers of our cases in our court system. Lawyers ought to be encouraged, or law students, to think about those alternatives. And I don't know that they are. I think we're still sort of wedded in the traditional notions of, lawyers as civil lawyers or criminal lawyers. I know there are clinics that do these other things, but I'm talking as far as part of the emphasis in the law schools, that let's look at what is needed out there. And so there's also a practical side of that. Now, it may not be as lucrative as being a commercial litigator or doing probate work, but as far as a value to society, it's critical.
Well said. I wonder if you think that you really talked about a mentoring relationship while kids are still in law school. Do you think it ought to be a requirement that there should be, there have been in other places and times, you've got to have almost apprenticed with an attorney before?
I get nervous about requirements, and I think that one of the things I've learned in the last 3 years on this court is that good ideas usually bubble up from the bottom up, that imposing something at the top is not always the best way to get something accomplished. I think it should be encouraged. I guess I'm a little reluctant to say, yes, you shall serve an apprenticeship, before you become a lawyer. I'd like to explore that more. I think it's worth exploring. But before saying absolutely yes, that should be a requirement, I'd want to know that there was consensus. How would that work? But I think it would be a marvelous idea. I am somebody that believes in seeing real life experiences. I mentioned how in law school my internships or my clinic experiences were so valuable to me. When he mentioned mentorship, I think that it is something that every person should do for a younger person in terms of just not lawyer situation, but just what adults can do to help children in this society. So I'm a great believer in that concept of mentorship, but it takes time, and you got to get the right fit, and that's not always easy. But I do think one other area for law schools, as long as we're giving our advice today, is that I know some of the law schools have pro bono requirements for their students before graduating, that is, to do something in the public interest. But I'd like to see that as a requirement for law schools. For our, in our bar, it is an aspirational requirement. We do not have mandatory pro bono, but we have reporting, and I think that that is an aspect of that we ought to be instilling in our law students. So I think that that would be a good requirement. But I would like to see some more organized programs that would encourage mentorship. I was involved in founding the Palm Beach County chapter of the American Inns of Court, which is a organization started in England and brought over here by Justice O'Connor, and I think Justice Rehnquist has been involved in it, which is based on the English model of a mentorship. And so what we had in West Palm Beach, we actually had law students in the Inns of Court, and there were the masters who were the more experienced lawyers, and then the barristers who were intermediate, and then there were the students, I guess, but the young lawyers and the law students. And so that American Inns of Court model might be a good one to look at on a broader base. My concern was only, were we getting the people where, so many times we're taught we speak to the choir, we preach to the choir, were we getting the people that really needed it? So I had always thought, well, maybe we should take the lawyers that start to sort of run amok and have them in the American Inns of Court rather than lawyers that are just, already considered to be doing a good job and doing a professional job.
So the opportunity for an informal relationship setting in the Inns of Court. And in law school, again, the mentoring programs allowing the students to receive and then to give out with the pro bono. Great ideas. Do you feel that the profession is doing, what do you feel strongly about that we're doing well?
We, as a profession, do you mean the Florida bar, or we as lawyers?
Well, a broader look, I guess, from your perspective.
As far as the Florida bar, I see that all the efforts that have been undertaken are all positive efforts. I know that maybe that's not some people feel the Florida bar is too in your face with these regulations. We've got CLE requirements, and we've got the certification, and we've got the mandatory reporting. I think those are all good things. And so I think that the efforts of the bar are commendable. I would like to see that the professionalism initiatives, I'd like to see that, make sure that the voluntary bar associations really take those efforts on. And you had again mentioned earlier my interest in the diversity aspects of professionalism, that I would like to see the diversity training and the sensitivity training that we're starting to be something that the voluntary bar associations pick up and make a part of their programs and their circuit programs. So I think that again, I think the bar is doing some really good things. I think that the profession as a whole, we have, and I haven't looked back at it, we beat ourselves up an awful lot. We're all feeling, it's gone downhill, we're not as professional as we used to be, we don't know people's name, and I don't know if this is anecdotal or actual numbers. And I guess Tony Boggs and the people over at the bar that do the discipline can tell us, are there more people that are getting disciplined because we have more lawyers, or is there a larger percentage? Even if there's a larger number of complaints, is that because we're more sensitive to things that we may have let go in the past? It's sort of like the area, if you take it's not a crude analogy, but in domestic violence, we now have all these domestic violence courts, and we have so much domestic violence. Well, a lot of people think we don't have more domestic violence, we just have a greater awareness. So we have the willingness of people to come forward about it. So I say, well, I don't want us to get too overly pessimistic, because I think that by and large, lawyers are professional and do aspire to do good things. So I think that if you look at the numbers of pro bono hours, they're remarkable. Just take that and, translate that into another profession and see if there's anything comparable to that. I think that I am very proud of our disciplinary process. Now, I'm sure it can be improved, but I think that, so I do think we're actually doing a very good job. That we may say, well, so what else can we do? And again, we can't change people. You can talk to people, you can hopefully inspire people, but you cannot change another person.
Excuse me. And you can't stop yourself from coughing sometimes. I'm sorry. I wanted to ask about core beliefs that have really supported you throughout your life. I was delighted to see that so much family was represented. I watched the tape of your investiture not long ago. I saw husbands, I saw mother, I saw family, I saw a student whom you mentored, and she spoke warmly of you. And I'm thinking there are some strong convictions that are represented by someone who produces all that.
Core beliefs, that's something that's sort of one of these intangibles that I don't know that I've ever sat down and thought about what my core beliefs are. I actually know, because I was listening earlier to Judge Barquette's interview. We talk a lot about, or people will mention, the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And my dad, who was not represented at the investiture because he had passed away in 1991, but I was thinking about the values but both he and my mother instilled in me. And I think that's what he always used to talk about, the golden rule. And I don't know that I totally, I just remember it as being something that he said, if you just live by this rule, everything else will take care of itself. And so I think of that. I think that means that if you want to be respected, you must treat other people as respect. If you'd like to get, you need to give. And so I think that is really, it's a great one, and it's one that I think it's almost in its simplicity. It's it has beauty. It's obvious. So I think that has been a core value for me. I think that honesty, which of course is I guess a byproduct of it, is something that both my parents instilled in me. But my dad, again, was somebody that was so honest that I thought about this story recently. Was in college, and we had figured out, or some other students had figured out a way that you could call home and you wouldn't be charged for it. And so I had called home, and I proudly told my father, this isn't costing you anything. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, well, we figured out this way. He goes, you can't do that. And he was shocked, and that I was shocked that I had done that. It was sort of like, well, you can get away with it. Well, then it's okay. And I think that, also my mom, they always used to talk, he was self-employed. And he did not, neither my mother or father had a college education. They were products of the Depression and went to work early on. So hard work, that's as a core belief, that you don't get anything for nothing, that you've got to, you work your hardest and you do your best was something that was always instilled in me by both my parents. But they always used to brag, that they would always audit people, the IRS, that if you were self-employed, and that every year that the IRS people would just shake their head because, he was reporting things that nobody was reporting. And so I think that had to have a pretty big influence on me. I think another, I don't know if it's a core belief, but you mentioned family. I really, I love people. I think that relationships, whether they are family or friendships or mentoring relationships, is what life is all about. You know, my husband, who is a judge on the 4th District Court of Appeal, who was a fellow trial lawyer with me, you know, we share a very deep relationship, a very deep love, but it's founded on a mutual respect. And so it's not just simply having that relationship, but respecting one another. And you know, that was something that was very, very much a part of my upbringing. You know, that there was some people would be brought up in families where, you know, parents would say, well, children should be seen and not heard. That was not something that was part of my family. You were, hopefully, you were part of the family unit, so you were listened to, you were respected, you were treated as an individual unless you did something that wasn't wrong, and then you were appropriately sanctioned for it. So it was a pretty traditional family, and I think that was important. Yeah, but I have more family than I did at the time of my investiture, because we have another grandchild, and the young woman that I mentored is now actually, she's up here at FAMU in her first year, so that's pretty terrific. And my goddaughter, who, you know, is now, she's just coming along terrifically, and so the family continues to grow and change, and it's really a very, very, so that's a good thing, because I mentioned about core beliefs, because I think that you've got to, you know, I mentioned balance, that you've got to be able to, you've got to take care of yourself, both that it is that you got to depend on yourself, and you also have to take care and nurture yourself, that no one else is going to look out for you as much as you are. And so that's also, I guess, a core belief of making sure that you remain as an independent person.
If someone had come to you when you were a very young attorney, or even in law school, or even as you were considering law, and had something extraordinary to say to you that really would have changed your heart and really would have made you realize all of a sudden kind of some of the goals of professionalism that you see now in retrospect as a seasoned veteran, what do you imagine it might have been? Is there anything one can say?
That there is no one definition of success. That success is not a matter of a monetary amount. That success is not something that can be defined by saying, how do other people view you? That each of us has to look inside of ourselves and live each day in a giving way, working our hardest, and being able to understand, and I think this is actually, whether we understand it at 20 or 30 or 40, but how we live our days is how we live our life. I love the expression, I don't know if it's Lily Tomlin, but she goes, or somebody, so it may not be Lily Tomlin, life is not a dress rehearsal. This is not a dress rehearsal. Do important things. Just don't, just don't look at, and look at all of the possibilities in the world. That again, you've been given, if you are a young lawyer now, and if I'm speaking to you, or if you're an older lawyer, that it's never too late tomorrow to go that extra step. That it is never too late to reassess, is this really where I want to be? Because we didn't get to, how did I end up as a judge, but, it was a life decision, yes. It was I want to do something different. It was something that I had not thought about for a very long time, but then it seemed like such a good idea. So I guess the idea is that the possibilities are limitless. You know, it's never too late to change, to make a decision, to do it better. But in the end, if you don't do it, you only you don't pin it on somebody else. It's your responsibility. This is your life, and you know, be kind to yourself. And I guess that is probably sums it up. Be kind to yourself and be kind to other people, and just I think it's about also contentment. You know, and it isn't all about winning or losing. It's so much more. You know, if you did your best, you tried your hardest, you treated each person with respect, your clients with respect, that in the end you can look at yourself in the mirror and know you did the right thing, not because it's what other people expected, but it's because of what you expected of yourself.
We're the winners today. Thank you for a gracious gift, Justice Pariente.